It's WNYC. Coming up next on both 93.9 FM and AM 820, it's Marketplace. On the show tonight, leading up to Election Day, the markets were anticipating a lot of uncertainty.
We might end up with an ambiguous result for the election, and that result might get challenged. We might end up with riots, you name it. And what we're seeing this morning is that the results are quite clear.
Wall Street's election agita is no more. That's coming up next on Marketplace. We'll be back with all things considered at 7 p.m. 74 degrees right now. It's mostly clear outside. We're going to see lows tonight in the low 60s. For tomorrow in our area, it'll still be quite nice. A little cooler, but still warm. Highs in the low 70s in the afternoon. It'll get pretty breezy tomorrow, and that wind will take us through the end of the week. It's WNYC at just about 6:30.
WNYC supporters include Shepherd Mullen, serving clients in Manhattan for over 20 years. With more than 1,100 lawyers globally, Shepherd Mullen helps companies address today's legal, real estate, business, and regulatory challenges. More at shepherdmullen.com.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Solidigm. Companies require a new approach to AI storage. Solidigm offers solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI from core to edge. StorageForAI.com.
It was indeed a change election. The economic changes to come ahead on the program today. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. Babbel's professional language learning platform offers practical and industry-specific language courses designed for faster, better learning and a more culturally inclusive workforce. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com. And by Odoo, management software designed to unite every aspect of business into one simple platform. Odoo aims to take businesses to the next level. ODOO.com. Everything any business will ever need. And by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire. Dive deeply into the wonders of the universe at templeton.org.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kyle Rizdal. It is Wednesday today, November the 6th. Good as always to have you along, everybody. The list of things that are going to change in this economy under President-elect Trump is a long one. We're going to spend the program today talking about them. The first started happening even before the election was called in the wee small hours of this morning. Markets started noticing and money started moving, and it kept happening throughout the day. The major indices up 2.5% or more across the board. Bond yields spiking. The change at hand here is certainty, or perhaps the absence of uncertainty now that we know who has won. With the obligatory caveat that the stock market is not the economy. We'll talk about the actual economy in just a minute. Marketplace's Sabri Ben-Achour gets us going.
The stock market is up for a pretty simple reason.
One of the many proposals that Donald Trump made while on the campaign trail was that he was going to cut the corporate income tax rate.
David Kelly is chief global strategist for JP Morgan Asset Management. Business tax cuts are good for earnings and stocks. Then there is the VIX. That is a measure of market volatility and or fear. That was down more than 20% by early this morning.
There was the fear of instability.
Raphael Duguay is an assistant professor at the Yale School of Management.
That we might end up with an ambiguous result, and that result might get challenged. We might end up with riots, you name it. And what we're seeing this morning is that the results are quite clear.
So fear gone, volatility down. Meanwhile, the bond market had a different fear that has not gone away.
Every person who invests in bonds, it's the first thing they want to talk about is the debt and the deficits.
Rick Reeder is CIO of Global Fixed Income at BlackRock. To pay for promised tax cuts, the government may have to borrow trillions from the bond market.
All of that has pushed people to say, gosh, if we're going to issue this much debt in the marketplace, it needs to be at a higher yield to absorb it.
So bond yields went up proactively. Over in the world of cryptocurrency, there were winners. Bitcoin popped up almost 7% even just last night.
Trump was very clear on his support for Bitcoin.
Haney Rushwan is CEO of 21 Shares, which sells crypto exchange-traded funds.
Trump himself has a lending application called World Liberty Financial that it itself is built on crypto.
Over in the loser column is the solar industry. Solar stocks fell double digits by morning. Michelle Davis is head of solar research at Wood Mackenzie.
The new Trump administration does present risks to a lot of the different incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act that would support a lot of these industries.
Of course, election uncertainty has now been replaced by policy uncertainty. A lot will depend on how many campaign trail promises make it into reality. In New York, I'm Sabri Ben-Achour for Marketplace.
On Wall Street today, Sabri kind of covered that, right? Still, details when we do the numbers. It's going to take a while to understand exactly how all the change that the president-elect is going to bring to this economy is going to play out. What we do know, though, is that Trump will take office in January with an economy that is, to quote Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal, remarkably strong. So we got Greg on the phone to help understand why that is and what it's going to mean come the change in administrations. Greg, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
You say in the beginning of this piece that was published, 10 days-ish or so ago, you say more impressive than the economic growth that we're having in this country is its quality. What does that mean?
The United States has grown very rapidly in the last year, certainly much faster than most other major developed countries. And even though it's grown rapidly, this has occurred while inflation has come down and while productivity per worker has gone up. So this tells us that the growth is not coming by straining the economy's capacity, which could lead to inflation. The kind of growth that means the Fed can feel comfortable continuing to lower interest rates, which makes it very unlikely we'll have a recession.
And we are, you say, and we've said before in this program, an outlier internationally, right? Europe and the rest of them are still struggling quite a bit.
That's right. If you look at the last year or two, the United States has grown faster than almost all of its peer economies. And when you dig into the numbers, a key reason why is because productivity has been growing faster in the United States, which seems to reflect a few intrinsic endowments that the U.S. has that they do not, like our abundant energy resources and the very strong technology sector, which can be seen in the amazing performance of companies like NVIDIA and Apple.
So let's talk nuts and bolts then. What does this mean, given the news of the day, or the news of last night, I suppose? What does this mean practically for President-elect Trump?
Well, I think the first thing it means is that Trump basically inherits a pretty good economy. He kind of has the wind at his back. There's really no reason to think that there's a recession in store in the next year or two. And based on what we know now, inflation is unlikely to be a big problem. It seems to be on track to decline from here. And that seems to be why financial markets were relatively buoyant coming into the election.
Even though, as many analysts and economists have pointed out, the policies of the president-elect do tend to be somewhat inflationary.
Yeah, so let's take a look at how we might expect the economic outlook to change under the policies of President-elect Trump. The two main parts of his platform are higher tariffs and lower taxes. And economists will tell you that higher tariffs, all else equal, will lead to higher inflation, and that tax cuts, all else equal, will lead to more rapid economic growth and larger government deficits. And if you look at how financial markets responded to the news of the election, that's exactly what they're anticipating. But I think it's very important to emphasize that we don't actually know what's going to happen. Trump himself has been relatively inconsistent in specifying exactly what he plans to do with respect to either tariffs or taxes. And of course, some of these proposals have to go through Congress as well. And we're actually still waiting to find out what the full composition of Congress will be and what its preference will be.
We know that presidents are unduly credited and unduly blamed for what happens in an economy. Do you see anything, springboarding off the premise of this piece, that will change the trajectory of the American economy?
I think that even before the election, it was fairly clear that the next few decade or so will be a period where inflation pressures will be more of a problem than they were in the decade before the pandemic. Cast your mind back, if you could. Before the pandemic, inflation and interest rates were low around the world, in part because it was the long tail of the global financial crisis, which had depressed investment and demand. Well, the next 10 years, I think, are going to be very different. We've put the global financial crisis long behind us. People everywhere are worried about supply chains because of things like pandemics, because of things like climate change, because of things like geopolitical conflict. And so I think that is an environment where inflation is more likely to be a problem on the upside than the downside. And that would have been true no matter who became president. And I think it basically affects how policies such as tariffs and tax cuts will be received. And I think that is a factor that President-elect Trump and his team will also have to deal with.
Greg Ip, he's the chief economics commentator at the Wall Street Journal. Greg, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
If what's past is indeed prologue, and if we're to take him at his word, tariffs will be the key trade policy in a second Trump administration. Last time around, he targeted steel and aluminum, also Chinese imports. This time, he has promised tariffs as high as 20% on everything that comes into this economy, 60% on everything from China. That, of course, will affect both businesses and consumers in this economy. So we asked Marketplace's Kristen Schwab to look at what tariffs have meant so far for businesses and consumers in this economy.
Rick Muscat woke up with tariffs on his mind.
Well, we started that conversation first thing this morning.
One he's had on and off since 2016. Muscat is president of footwear brand Deer Stags, which makes most of its shoes in China. He says tariffs or not, manufacturing will stay there.
It's very costly to move production from one country to another. There's a lot of investment in equipment, the molds, the patterns, the cutting dyes.
Tariffs are supposed to encourage U.S. companies to diversify their supply chains. Erica York at the Tax Foundation says this did happen in some cases during Trump's last term.
Imports from Taiwan, from Mexico, from the European Union increased. We also saw some substitution toward domestic suppliers.
American steel, for instance, got a boost. But tariffs come with a price. Scott Lincecum at the Cato Institute says the 2018 steel tariffs affected makers of beer kegs, cars, and cutlery.
Those companies were extremely hard hit because a huge chunk of their costs just suddenly got more expensive.
Lincecum says some companies ate those costs. Many passed them on to consumers. That's what Muscat at Deer Stag says he'll do. Trump's proposed 60% tariff would add something like $25 onto the sticker price of his shoes. There is one other option.
If I don't pass the costs on ultimately to the consumer, then I have to reduce my cost of doing business so that I could stay in business.
He says that would mean cutting staff. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
Coming up,
if you remove migrants from a local economy, you're going to raise prices.
So what does that mean now? First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's up 1,508 points today, 3 6/10%, 43,729. The NASDAQ ascended 544 points, 3%, 18,983. The S&P 500 up 146. That's points. 2.5 is the percent. 59 and 29. Prediction markets, where people place bets on the outcome of, say a presidential election. They claimed victory along with the president-elect today. They say they predicted the win more accurately than traditional polling. So among those operating prediction markets, Interactive Brokers Incorporated rang up 10 and 8/10%. Robinhood soared at 19 and 6/10%. Tesla shares climbed 14 and 3/4% today. No reason for that, I'm sure. Bonds down, yield on the 10-year T-note, 4.43%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace Numbers is supported by Rubrik, cyber resilience for unstoppable business. Rubrik.com. Marketplace is supported by Capato, an AI-powered DevOps platform designed for business applications like Salesforce. Capato unifies technical and business users to plan, build, test, release, and operate in sync. Capato, AI-powered, people-focused. And by VantageScore, a leading inclusive and predictive credit score used by 8 out of 10 largest banks and over 3,400 banks and fintechs nationwide. VantageScore drives financial inclusion by leveraging innovation. More at VantageScore.com. And by Fortune, dedicated to empowering leaders to make intelligent business decisions and delivering unbiased reporting since 1929. Subscription options, email newsletters, and more available at Fortune.com.
Support for WNYC comes from IBM. With IBM Watson X, businesses can build a custom AI assistant that can leverage their trusted data and be trained on their workflows. It can be tuned to do just what businesses need. More information at ibm.com/productivity.
Anytime is a great time to experience art. It can be especially healing. This year on All of It, we've been identifying 100 works of art you should see here in New York City. On the next show, we'll be joined by the director and chief curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, Thelma Golden. She'll share her list of art that moves her, and we want to know yours. I'm Allison Stewart. Join us for All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, for the first time since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, voters in a few states rejected abortion protections. We're going to take a look at that and much more at 7 o'clock. Stay tuned.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. Lost, perhaps, in the news of last night and this morning is that today is the first day of the Fed's policy-setting meeting. We will get the interest rate announcement tomorrow. That, as a reminder, interest rates is monetary policy. What the president-elect and Congress do is fiscal policy, separate but symbiotic. So, to read the tea leaves on what those fiscal changes we're talking about today are going to mean for the Fed, we've gotten Heather Long on the phone. She's a columnist at the Washington Post, also, not for nothing, one of our Friday regulars. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Kai.
So picking up where I left off with Greg Ip and the president-elect's proposed policies, many of them are, in fact, inflationary, right? Tariffs, restricting immigration. What do you suppose those inflationary pressures are going to mean for the central bank?
It's a really tricky time because, as you say, these policies are inflationary, but as Greg Ip was pointing out, it takes time for them to kick in. You know, thinking back to the first Trump administration, it took over a year to get those China tariffs in place, for example. So if you're the Fed, you don't want to preemptively start to plan for that right away. But what we are already seeing market reaction on is a widespread belief that because the economy has been doing really well the last few months, so many of these data points are coming in hot or stronger than expected, it gives the Fed some breathing room to take a pause. It's still widely expected to cut tomorrow on Thursday 25 basis points. It's starting to be a little up in the air whether they'll cut in December or certainly in early 2025. So it gives them a chance to wait and see how fast the Trump administration will act.
Keep going with that for a second. So the numbers are coming in hot, so the Fed could conceivably let the economy run for a little bit. They could cut tomorrow, which seems to be what they're going to do, but then just hold, right?
I think so. You've seen the odds of the December rate cut come down a little bit. It's still at about 70%. But remember, that can change very fast. Fed Chair Powell has become a dexterous communicator, and he could use that press conference tomorrow to sort of start to open the door to, we think we're in a good place, we're in a bit more wait and see, these types of terms that he knows how to use pretty well at this point in the game.
Sorry, this is a little sideways, but how many questions do you suppose he's going to get, or the same question posed various different ways, about Fed independence, which we have talked about on this program?
It's tricky for him. Obviously, his tenure ends in May of 2026. President Trump will appoint his successor, and there's not much Powell can do about that. I think he's tried really hard to shore up this institution as much as possible and to protect it from political influence, but it's no longer going to be his game and his say very soon. So you're right. He'll get a ton of questions tomorrow. He'll do the artful dodge. He's very good at saying, as you know, you've been asking him to, we don't do politics, da-da-da-da-da. But you're right. He's going to have to take the policies into consideration very soon.
Yeah. All right. Back to policy stuff. The dollar. So tariffs are going to go up. Interest rates here. The Fed's going to lower theirs, but the bond market has some say in that. What's this all going to mean for the dollar?
Well, it's certainly, we saw it today, and dollar's looking hot, hot, hot. It's a good time if you can afford it to book a vacation abroad, because the dollar goes a long way. But, realistically, with the dollar rising, the euro falling, the Mexican peso really sold off in the last 24 hours, the yen, this is not going to help that inflationary situation. It's kind of going to make it more difficult to sell U.S. products abroad and revive U.S. manufacturing in the ways that we want to and Trump has pledged to do. So it's a bit of a question mark. It's interesting. Trump campaigned on lowering the value of the dollar, and we've certainly gone the opposite way. I think the other point that I'll just pick up on that Greg was talking about a little bit, I think some of this movement we're seeing in the dollar and also in the bond yields, and, part of it is what we've been talking about, expectations of stronger growth, more inflation, but some of it too is just uncertainty. Yes, we have certainty now on who the president's going to be, but there's really a lot of concern and a lot of confusion and uncertainty about how many tariffs is he really going to do? Is it going to be 10%, 20%? We haven't talked about immigration, another huge factor. Does he truly stop the border on day one? Does he truly attempt to deport people and millions of people? I mean, these are seismic shifts in the economy that people, it's very hard to model these.
Yeah. Economic unknowns, right? I mean, that's kind of what they are.
And imagine being in the Fed in the middle of all that.
Right. Heather Long at the Washington Post. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Kai.
Talk to you soon. Heather mentioned immigration, and lo and behold, here it is. Change is coming to immigration policy as well. Big changes. It is worth a note that immigration, politically sensitive though it may be, is fundamentally labor policy. The once and future president has promised that he is going to launch, as Heather said, the biggest deportation program this country's ever seen, targeting the estimated 11 million or so unauthorized immigrants in this economy. And Trump advisors have also been drawing up plans to restrict legal immigration as well. Marketplace's Matt Levin explains how that is going to affect everything from growth to wages to, inflation.
So some caveats here. Trump has a history of making big promises on immigration that don't actually materialize. That whole build a wall and make Mexico pay for it thing. But if this time around Trump really does ramp up deportations, economist Stan Voiger at the American Enterprise Institute estimates GDP growth would be cut by almost 0.5 percentage point, which is a lot. Not only does the overall workforce shrink, but deported workers can't contribute to the economy.
People don't earn money, they don't produce, they don't generate capital income for others. And so that just has a direct impact on aggregate GDP.
Fewer immigrants in the labor force could also mean higher prices, especially for industries that disproportionately employ undocumented workers. Economist Tariq Hassan at Boston University says part of the reason the Fed was able to tamp down inflation over the past 2 years was because of an influx of foreign-born workers.
If you remove migrants from a local economy, you're going to raise prices in the local economy for everything from produce in the supermarket to Uber rides.
Whether removing undocumented immigrants also raises wages for low-skilled workers is a matter of economic debate. Most economists left and right of center will tell you the impact is relatively small, but Duncan Braid at the pro-Trump think tank American Compass says less immigration will make some industries more efficient.
I think, as we've seen in the agricultural sector, sort of the access to an unending stream of low-wage workers has sort of hindered the impetus for those firms to automate.
According to a recent Gallup poll, about 55% of U.S. adults want less immigration, legal or illegal. I'm Matt Levin for Marketplace.
The simple fact of the matter, keeping with the labor market angle that Matt was just telling us about, the fact of the matter is that there just aren't enough workers in this country to do what has got to get done. That's a challenge for businesses, of course, but it's a problem for the whole economy as well, as Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman explains.
I meet Steven Sassa with construction company Green Gables Design and Restoration, supervising a small construction crew in downtown Portland, Oregon. Sassa and two journeyman carpenters are rebuilding pandemic-era sidewalk dining patios to meet new city codes.
These guys are probably making $40 or $50 an hour. They're also getting full medical benefits.
Still, he says, it can be difficult to keep workers in these jobs.
We pretty much just work in the wintertime all winter long. Outside, just dig big holes and get muddy.
That kind of work's not for everyone. Another reason it's hard to fill these jobs, a shortage of skilled workers, from pipe fitters to project managers.
If we haven't been able to train somebody for the position and somebody leaves, that creates a huge problem.
At Associated General Contractors of America, VP for Workforce Brian Termale says while the overall job market may be slowing down,
we haven't heard any of our members telling us that it's getting easier to find qualified workers to hire.
Demand for workers is high, with the surge in federal funding for infrastructure, semiconductor, and EV production. But Termale says the sector's also beset by generational deficits. Baby boomers are retiring, and there have been decades of educational disinvestment.
80% of what the federal government spends, it spends encouraging and supporting people to get a 4-year college degree. And only 20% goes to what we call career and technical education, workforce training and development.
Part of the problem in construction and manufacturing is the image of these careers, says Michael Gritton at workforce development agency Kentuckiana Works.
They had been laying people off for 20 years in places like Louisville. The parents of those kids were saying, don't go into manufacturing because the jobs aren't going to be steady. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Kentuckiana Works partners with local employers trying to build a skilled worker pipeline, including GE Appliances, which employs 6,000 workers in Louisville, double the number it had 7 years ago. Senior manager Katina Whitlock says the company runs programs in local high schools.
We built a mock assembly line where students learn hands-on experiences from our production employees.
Seniors can work part-time in the factory, then get a full-time union job after graduation, starting at $17 an hour. GE also works with Louisville's immigrant communities. There are 80 languages spoken in the plant, from Spanish to Swahili.
We had hired multilingual talent recruiters. We have shifts where we actually speak the first language of those employees.
The challenge starts with helping young people navigate blue-collar career paths, to understand what they pay and how to get started, says management professor Peter Capelli at the Wharton School.
I did look into this for one of my kids who was interested in becoming a welder, and it was virtually impossible to help him figure out how to do it.
Capelli says many high schools don't offer vocational education anymore. Union apprenticeships are few and far between, and community college programs can be expensive and teach a lot of stuff workers in the skilled trades don't need. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Viking, exploring the world in comfort. With a fleet of small ships, Viking offers travel experiences for the thinking person. Discover more at Viking.com. And by ADP Research, committed to making the world of work more productive through data-driven discovery. Insights at work for the future of work. Learn more at adpresearch.com.
This final note on the way out today, it's It's an observation, really, about partisanship in this economy. We did a whole series of public opinion polls about 6 or 8 years ago. Key economic issues people were worried about, their personal financial situations, that kind of thing. One of the questions we asked in 2016 and again in 2018 was whether people trusted government economic data. In 2016, Clinton voters trusted the data basically 2-1 over Trump voters. In 2018, that flipped almost on its head. Supporters of by then President Trump decided government data was fine after all. Democratic voters, less so. Draw your own conclusions, obviously, but that's not great. Our media production team includes Brian Allison, Jake Cherry, Justin Dueller, Drew Jostad, Gary O'Keefe, Charlton Thorpe, Juan Carlos Tirado, and Becca Weinman. Jeff Peters is the manager of media production. And I'm Kai Risdall. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.
WNYC is supported by NYU.